Greetings, friends of liberty. When I pass in my carriage through the streets of London and see the enormous variety of produce and goods shown in our shops and stalls, I can only marvel at the ability of our commerce and trade to bring such an assortment from England, Europe, and the world to markets within hours' walking distance of nearly every hamlet or mansion in the city. First, we have the Billingsgate fish market, renowned for its flounder, salmon, eel, and smelt, and said to be perhaps the largest in the world, with hundreds of boats bringing their catch to the docks daily. And then, for those wishing a repast other than fillet of sole with asparagus, there is the Smithfield meat market, with annual sales over 100,000 muumuus and 1,000,000 babas. Lively indeed it is, with all those at full bray. Not to be forgotten also, we see Covent Garden, partly 'tis true, devoted to the entertainment of all imaginable kind, but which also serves as a vegetable, fruit, and flower market, with flower girls, costume-mongers, porters, and hundreds of shops lined with fabrics, furniture, and clothing. And throughout the city, in neighborhood markets, we see bacon from Ireland, hams from Germany and Spain, rabbits from Belgium, eggs and brandy. I do beg your pardon. Eggs and brandy from the Frenchies, butter from Ireland and the United States, coffee from Ceylon, tea from China, cocoa and sugar from the West Indies, and all manner of spices from the East Indies. And to think that all these goods arrive uncontrolled, unplanned, or directed by any sovereign, or even the mayor. However, if we turn to commerce and trade in your 21st century, we find, surprisingly, a group of people called locavores who would, whether voluntarily or no, stifle, inhibit, or control free food commerce, confining themselves and sometimes forcing others to eating only local foods. Locavores. As we see around us, the West is increasingly filled with ideologies of all stripes and colors. And as recent events in Israel have shown, one can hardly turn around before tens of thousands of fanatics created in our universities and imported from other countries show no shyness in advertising their anti-Semitism. Similarly, while of course not on the same level, locavores are yet another in a long array of recently created intellectual fanatics who imagine to make the world a better place by disdaining the food from other regions and countries. Think of many Muslims with their disdain for pork, that delicious meat, and you'll get the same level of irrationality. And on your side, the United States government even supports at times these ideologues, with the U.S. Congress, for example, privileging local farms over more distant ones in their Local Farms Food and Jobs Act in 2011. One of the sponsors of the bill specifically claimed that citizens want to be able to buy fresh, healthy food that doesn't have to travel halfway around the world to get to them. Now, why in God's name would locavores ever imagine that by rejecting Indian Darjeeling, Cuban cigars, Costa Rican coffee, Italian prosciutto, French truffles, Swiss chocolate, Texas filet mignon, Maine lobster, Alaskan smoked salmon, German bratwurst, and Greek Kalamata olives, we can make the world a better place? All this and more is explained and answered in detail by Shimizo and Desrocher's The Locavore's Dilemma, in praise of the 10,000-mile diet. By way of review, let's examine 10 popular Locavore food fallacies and then see, with the help of our authors, the actuality. Fallacy number 1. Locavores claim that if you simply add up the miles that are used to bring foods to market from where they're produced by land, sea, or air to where they're sold, then that mileage is a good estimate for how much carbon is emitted by this food's production. Food miles. So we can allegedly fight climate change. Is this true? No. If we look at the most efficient agricultural producers, they obviously tend to be located in areas where growing conditions are optimal. Florida and Spain for oranges, Greece for olives, and Brazil for coffee. How much more expensive would it be for a local producer to grow oranges, olives, and coffee in, for example, upstate New York for New York City? It would cost 10, 20, or 30 times more. We thus save enormous amounts of money and resources just by shipping those crops from Florida, Greece, or Brazil to New York City. Transport costs tending to be a very small fraction of the overall production and emissions costs. B. In America, the food miles segment, from producer to retailer, contributes only about 4% of total emissions related to what Americans take home in their grocery bags. And on the other side of the Atlantic, a UK consumer driving 6 miles to buy Kenyan green beans emits more carbon dioxide per bean than does flying the vegetables from Kenya to the UK. Number 2. Locavores use the phrase food sovereignty to imply that if I buy my bananas from Costa Rica and they ship the bananas to me, that national sovereignty on both sides is somehow compromised, or would be in times of war. Is that true? Or on another twist of this, they say that countries that import a lot of food, like Japan, are food parasites. A. First, food and other goods were never just locally produced, even millennia ago. For example, in North America, the woodland Indians of British Columbia traded for faraway goods like dried seaweed, edible candlefish grease, and dried salmon from those Indians who lived on the coast. And that made perfect sense. Further south, in what is now Illinois, the large Cahokia Indian settlement, estimated at 40,000 people, imported various building materials and products from other areas of the country, such as from the Gulf Coast, shells, Lake Superior, copper, Oklahoma, chert, a flint-like rock, and the Carolinas, mica. None of these Indian groups lost any of their sovereignty by doing so. To the contrary, they advanced their tribal and national well-being by their free trade, making their nations more prosperous. B. In case of international conflict, one can often stockpile food first and sometimes still get it from alternate countries in case of war. But the whole point of war is that you have to do without in some respects. Why live your life in peacetime as if it's war? It would be enormously expensive to do so. Fallacy number 3. Locavores sometimes claim that heritage, heirloom seeds, in other words, the seeds that our mothers used when planting the tomatoes in the garden a half-century ago, are better than the best modern hybridized genetically modified seeds. Is that true? Not in most circumstances. As farmer Blake Hurst says, people will read an article trumpeting the wonderful taste of German Johnson or Brandywine tomatoes, buy a few and lose them all to blight. The next year, they ask for hybrids with blight resistance. Similarly, modern farmers and plant researchers can tap into large seed banks, which include hundreds of thousands of varieties for major crops like rice and ever more sophisticated breeding technologies. In addition, the use of GMO seeds, some of which can produce their own insecticides, mean even more productivity at lower cost because you don't have to spray your crops anymore. Fallacy number 4. Locavores claim that they feel better about the food they buy when they can, in essence, personally talk to the farmers whose produce they buy. As food writer Rod Dreher said, "When you've seen the face of the woman who planted it and shaken the hand of the man who harvested it, you become aware of the intimate human connection between you, the farmer, and the earth. To do so is to become aware of the radical giftedness of our lives, and to reverse the sweeping process of alienation from the earth and from each other that the industrialized agriculture and mass production of foodstuffs has wrought." Please excuse me. Does this alleged intimacy with Gaia and fellow foodies really make food better? Do you really need to know your farmer, as the United States Department of Agriculture claims? Not for me, and I imagine not for most buyers. Would you want to have to talk to the grower of every head of lettuce, every scallion, pepper, tomato, cucumber, squash, and onion that you buy? And again, as Farmer Blakehurst says of himself, a suburban housewife is likely to be mortified by my looks, the way I smell, and my opinions. I can't imagine why any resident of Manhattan would want to know me. And trust me, some of my neighbors are even worse. Fallacy number 5. Famous elite foodies, like Michael Pollan, author of The Omnivore's Dilemma, claim that the best way to improve our food experience is to pay more and eat less. Could that be true, that food frugality is a vice? No. The reality is that large producers who are more efficient than small producers often offer us both better value and price. Here's a typical historical example would be the large meat producers in the U.S., like Swift, Armour, and Morris, that rose in Chicago in the 1880s and later. These companies were so huge compared to the average local butcher that by utilizing every bit of the cow or pig besides meat so efficiently, they could offer a higher price for the cow or pig to the farmer and a lower price for the resulting steak or pork chops to the housewife. As the authors say, this large-scale production made it possible to turn animal parts such as hide, hoofs, horns, bones, blood, and hair, which in the hands of small butchers were of little value or dead loss, into products from glue and bone dust to fertilizers. Excuse me. So contrary to Pollan, without locavorism, you can pay less and eat better. Fallacy number 6. Locavores claim or imply that native or regional foods were somehow there from the very beginning, from time immemorial, or at least for millennia in specific regions. Is this true? Not in many cases. As the authors point out, Indian curries, Hungarian paprika, and Korean kimchi did not exist before the introduction of the American chili pepper. So, surprise, surprise, if locavores are right, then curry is not really Indian. And neither would be traditionally North American crops like soybean, corn, and wheat, which are native to China, Mexico, and the Middle East. That's right, wheat originally came from the Middle East, so much for all those native fields of waving amber Kansas grain. The authors conclude this point by saying, a truly made-in-the-USA agricultural diet would be limited to turkeys, some shellfish, Atlantic salmon and brook trout, sunflowers, blueberries, cranberries, Jerusalem artichokes, and some squash. Try living on that, Michael Pollan. Number 7. Locavores claim that for achieving food security in times of emergencies, having prosperous local growers and producers will help us more than relying on foreign or distant markets, whose supply chains may be compromised. Is this true? not with regard to famines. The reality instead is that famines tend to occur in a specific region. So the more free trade exists, the more other regions can help save your region from the famine it's experiencing. So, for example, in the 1920s, Chinese peasants recalled an average of 3 crop failures during their lifetimes that were serious enough to cause famines. Fallacy number 8. Locavores claim that, all things considered, local food will taste better because it is fresher and will, by the same count, be more nutritious. Is this true? Now, while it's true that we often justifiably rely on local growers for some garden produce in season, the modern reality is that even this age-old fact for which we never needed locavorism is significantly qualified by modern technologies. So, for example, in the U.S., California strawberries are shipped throughout the country and stay fresh comparatively long. As the authors say, these might travel some distance, but they do it in a matter of days and in impeccable storage conditions. Not only are they cheaper and better looking, but they also typically taste tastier. B. Large producers have traditionally developed different grades of produce to precisely distinguish quality. So with Canadian apples, there are Canada Extra Fancy, Canada Fancy, Canada Commercial, Canada Hailed, Canada Commercial Cookers, Canada No. 1 Peelers, and Canada No. 2 Peelers. Are you going to get that level of quality differentiation at your local farmer's market? Not likely. C. It's not unknown in some farmers markets for farmers to substitute brand name products. So don't just assume you're getting homegrown. In addition, sometimes farmers send their worst produce to farmers markets because customers think that imperfections and blemishes are an indicator of authenticity. D. Because locally produced items are often out of season, they need to be stored, and thus they can lose nutrition and taste. As one study found, not only were imported items fresher than stored local produce, but they also reduced the costs associated with storage, especially in terms of refrigeration and spoilage. E. Because local foods have less diversity and selection, they are often resulted in boring and less nutritious diets, irrespective of whether the foods are fresher or not, because they don't offer as wide a range of necessary foods. Fallacy number 9. Do local producers, as locavores often maintain, produce less waste overall? No, they don't. First, the extra packaging that often comes with store-bought items keeps the produce cleaner and thus safer, and helps it to last longer as well, thus reducing overall food waste by reducing perishability. Second, because large producers are more likely to be more professional and knowledgeable, they can deal with the waste they produce better and more efficiently than if it's scattered in small locations, produced by less knowledgeable growers throughout the country. And finally, fallacy number 10. Locavores claim that local producers can provide greater food safety and less disease than multinational companies or large producers. True, not generally. As the authors relate, if locavores are patronizing organic producers, rigorous tests have shown that many pesticides used by organic producers display higher toxicity for mammals, persist longer in the environment, and do more collateral damage to non-pests. B. Because bigger producers can generally control for conditions better, they offer a better safety record. This was typically illustrated by the most deadly outbreak of listeriosis in the U.S. in recent history in 2011, when Jensen Farms, a pesticide-free and 4 generations strong family-operated cantaloupe farm located in southeast Colorado, killed 33 people and sickened over 100, partly caused by the local Sam's Club, Walmart, and Safeway, who promoted and catered to locally grown produce. Incidentally, food poisoning deaths with the rise of large food producers have dropped to perhaps 1% of what they were in the year 1900. So in conclusion, I, of course, have nothing against people buying local produce, as people have done for millennia, but that's not what locavorism is about. Instead, locavorism is about rejecting California strawberries, Chilean green seedless grapes, and Italian prosciutto, and those rejections make zero sense. And because our authors so deftly dismantle the many erroneous claims of these foodiots, this book deserves an A-. Now, I think I shall prepare myself a cup of India's finest Darjeeling, the champagne of teas. I bid you well, and remain the Scarlet Pimpernel.